The air over El Alamein in the summer of 1942 did not move. It hung thick, a shimmering curtain of heat and fine, hostile silica dust that coated the lungs and jammed the sophisticated mechanisms of war. The sun, a brutal, unforgiving disk, beat down on the endless, desolate expanse, baking the sand to a temperature that promised the failure of every seal and the vaporization of every drop of coolant. It was precisely within this crucible of environmental stress that the Wehrmacht found its deadliest, most refined instrument of combat, the Panzerkampfwagen IV Ausführung F2, or simply the Panzer IV F2. This machine, a marvel of German precision engineering, was not merely a tank. It was the physical codification of a military ideology that prioritized quality and firepower above all else, a lethal, efficient declaration that technical superiority was the ultimate arbiter of mechanized warfare. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter felt the low, resonant tremor of the Maybach HL 120 engine through the very soles of his heavy leather boots, a deep, comforting pulse beneath the floor plates of his command tank. Richter was a veteran of the long, arduous sweep from Gazala, a man whose youthful face was now etched with the perpetual squint of the desert commander, and whose mind had been wholly rewired by the intoxicating success of the Blitzkrieg in Africa. He stood in the cupola, the desert wind a hot, abrasive scour on his cheeks, the dust blinding but irrelevant, for his vision was focused not on the horizon, but on the gunnery report transmitted moments before. His Panzer IV No. 341 was part of the vanguard that day, pushing east toward the impossible British defense line. It was then, through the wavering heat haze, that the first of the enemy tanks lumbered into view, and an immediate, visceral wave of relief and derision swept through the German ranks. They were the American M3 Grants, massive, high-profile steel boxes with their 75mm gun awkwardly mounted in a sponson on the hull, a design that seemed to be a humiliating, obsolete compromise. Richter heard the crackle of laughter over the internal intercom from his gunner, Feldwebel Müller. "Look, Herr Oberleutnant, flying milk bottles. They look as though they were built by a farmer with a welding torch." The laughter was sharp, confident, and entirely justified. The German crews had already designated the American and British armor, especially the early models, as little more than target practice or mobile coffins, a contempt born of a crushing, repeated battlefield advantage. This laughter, however, would soon become the irony that defined the campaign, a hubristic sound quickly replaced by the terrifying silence of absolute destruction. The source of the German arrogance was singular and devastating. The L-43 7.5 cm anti-tank gun mounted on the Panzer IV F2. This was the radical upgrade, the game-changer, that had transformed the medium Panzer from an infantry support vehicle into the uncontested master of the desert battlefield. It fired a high-velocity, tungsten-cored shell that pierced the armor of virtually every Allied tank it encountered with contemptuous ease, often punching clean through the vehicle and exploding somewhere far beyond, leaving a hole the size of a teacup and a smoking, incinerated crew inside. It was a weapon of mathematical precision and overwhelming lethality, an instrument that turned the technical deep dive of German ballistics into visceral sensory reality. The psychological impact of facing this gun was as crippling as the physical damage. It established an asymmetry of combat, where German tanks could engage and kill from well beyond the range at which the enemy could even hope to return fire, transforming every engagement into a desperate, suicidal gamble. Richter did not laugh. He simply gave the sharp, decisive order. "Gunner, 3,300 meters. Traverse right, target the lead Grant. Fire." The cannon fired with a sharp, concussive thunderclap, and the Grant, 1,000 meters beyond what its own gun could manage, immediately erupted in a towering column of oily, black smoke. The subsequent engagements were a brutal, repetitive affirmation of the German thesis. Technical superiority was destiny. This day, like so many before it, ended with the desert scattered with burning, shattered Allied wrecks, and Richter's unit suffering only minor track damage. The maintenance logs told the horrifying, simple story of the early Desert War. An initial kill-to-loss ratio that often stood at 7-1 in favor of the Germans. A terrifying, relentless figure that seemed to prove German invincibility and the enduring fundamental supremacy of their engineering. This chapter establishes the premise of technical supremacy and its immediate, devastating effects, setting up the dramatic fall. Richter and his cohorts, basking in the glow of the Panzer IV F2's 7-1 kill ratio, perceived their conflict as a duel of machines and men, a contest where superior engineering would inevitably humble brute force. They were correct in the immediate, technical sense, but devastatingly wrong in the strategic, cosmological reality of 1942. For at the precise moment that the German tank crews were laughing at the M3 Grant, the true overwhelming adversary was not even a tank, but an unending torrent of steel, oil, and volume flowing from the massive, anonymous factory floor of a nation 3,000 miles distant, a relentless, non-human adversary whose power resided in its sheer, corpulent capacity. The Wehrmacht's logistical backbone was a fragile, high-precision instrument built on ideological ideals of specialized perfection. The Allied counterforce was a vast, sprawling, unapologetic engine of mass production, a system that understood war not as a chess match, but as an equation of attrition. The perfect German tank was being built by hand. The American answer was being stamped out by the million. Consider the seemingly trivial detail of the 1.5-ton military truck, a vehicle whose existence was utterly devoid of the glamour of a Panzer IV. This humble truck, often the GMC KW353, was the true logistical champion of the Allies. It was not specialized, it was standardized. It used common parts, its maintenance was brutally simple, and its single, overwhelming virtue was its abundance. This standardization, this industrial focus on the mundane, was a deliberate, strategic decision that turned the truck from a mere piece of equipment into the very cosmic significance of Allied victory, a testament to the unromantic, overwhelming power of logistical simplicity. While German engineers meticulously crafted the L-43 cannon's complex breech block in a specialized, darkened facility, the vast, repetitive assembly lines of Detroit and Cleveland were already transforming the American Midwest into the arsenal of democracy. Contrast the sleek, specialized German factory output, designed for perfection and constrained by resource scarcity, with the almost terrifying scale of Ford's Willow Run facility. Willow Run was a structure so immense that its own construction workers were given bicycles to traverse its length. It was a factory designed to build a single product, the B-24 Liberator bomber, at a rate of 1 every 60 minutes. The same philosophy of brute force scale was applied to the M4 Sherman tank. It was never the technical equal of the Panzer IV F2 in terms of armor or anti-tank gun penetration. It was, in German eyes, a good enough machine. But the strategic genius of the Sherman was that it could be manufactured in multiple independent factories across the United States, utilizing relatively unskilled labor and over-engineered components, designed to survive the very environmental stress that crippled the Panzer IV's high-tolerance parts. The sheer, staggering numbers tell the story. Where Germany produced approximately 1,900 of its specialized Panzer IV F2G tanks in the pivotal year of 1942, the United States was already on track to produce nearly 5,000 M4 Shermans in that year. This capacity was built on an industrial foundation utterly unreachable by the Axis powers. The statistical reveal that truly defined the war was not a tank's speed or a gun's penetration, but the elemental materials of industry. In 1942, the Axis powers had a combined monthly output of steel that barely registered 3 million tons. The Allies, predominantly the United States, were producing steel at a rate exceeding 11 million tons per month. More unforgiving still was the oil output. The Germans were agonizingly constrained by their 1.8 billion barrels of oil produced that year, a figure rapidly trending toward scarcity. The United States, by itself, was pumping oil at a rate of 32 billion barrels per year. This was an economic declaration of war, the unforgiving power of American logistics codified in the most basic, overwhelming data points. The Panzer IV F2 may have been the fastest, deadliest shark in the desert, but its fate was sealed by the incoming, relentless tsunami of American production, a superior system that understood that volume, not technical genius, was the ultimate mathematics of defeat. Oberleutnant Richter experienced the intoxicating high of the blitzkrieg sweep as a physical phenomenon, a sense of invulnerability as the desert blurred past. Yet for every moment of high-speed action that defined the German narrative of victory, there was a corresponding slow-burn reality happening 50 kilometers behind the lines. An unseen war being waged not against the British Eighth Army, but against the very ground they drove over. The hook was found in the choking desperation of a maintenance bay near Tobruk, where an anonymous German mechanic, a farmer's son named Franz, wrestled with the complex, high-performance heart of the Panzer, the Maybach HL 120 engine. Its nemesis was the fine silica dust, a pulverized rock so minute and aggressive that it infiltrated every seal, every bearing, and every moving part, turning the lubricating oil into a thick, grinding slurry that accelerated wear exponentially. Franz knew the truth. The tank was not merely out of action, it was being consumed by the environment. The German response to this environmental assault was to fit elaborate, specialized sand filtration systems, complex external air filters that were themselves a logistical nightmare of cleaning, replacement, and specialized maintenance. This necessity for high-precision, fine-tolerance parts was the core weakness of the German engineering philosophy. The Panzer IV's complex torsion bar suspension, while offering superior cross-country performance, was an intricate network of specialized, stressed steel components, each requiring exacting calibration and metallurgy. This fastidious requirement for precision stood in stark contrast to the American design philosophy. Where the Germans built a machine that demanded perfection to function, the Americans built a machine designed to be over-engineered for rugged simplicity and mass production. The M4 Sherman, for instance, largely utilized the simpler, more robust, and easier to maintain vertical volute, spring suspension, VVSS system. The Sherman's engine was a workhorse built with wider tolerances, designed to ingest and expel the desert sand without immediate catastrophic failure. For the Germans, a lost engine due to sand ingestion meant the loss of an irreplaceable, specialized product of highly skilled labor and scarce alloys. This mechanical failure was the desert's revenge, a silent, persistent attack that no amount of superior gunnery could defeat. The cold, hard statistical reveal confirmed this brutal reality, a number that terrified the German High Command far more than any British counterattack. In the most intense periods of the North African campaign, up to 70% of all German tank losses were classified not as combat losses, but as mechanical breakdowns, vehicles that were simply driven into the ground, worn out by the silica, scuttled for lack of spare parts, or immobilized for lack of the fuel necessary to retrieve them. This staggering figure stripped the facade of invincibility from the Panzer IV F2. Its undeniable technical superiority was rendered utterly irrelevant because it could not defeat the unrelenting grinding of the sand and the unscalable complexity of its own construction. The environment acted as a cruel accelerator for the logistical thesis, amplifying the Germans' fundamental inability to replace their specialized, worn-out components. The Desert War was fought not just with steel and high explosives, but with liquid energy, and here, in the realm of petroleum, the Panzerkampfwagen IV F2's undeniable supremacy was reduced to a pathetic, self-defeating liability. For Oberleutnant Richter, the exhilaration of the blitzkrieg sweep was inevitably followed by the cold, sickening dread that came with his constant agonizing check of the fuel gauge. His Maybach HL-120 engine, a magnificent piece of engineering, was also a prodigiously thirsty machine, burning fuel at a rate that made every offensive thrust a tactical triumph but a logistical catastrophe. The truth was that the German-African effort was out of gas. The human-scale event that hammered this strategic truth home happened far from the tank turret, beneath the churning olive-green waters of the central Mediterranean. It was the sinking of an Italian tanker convoy torpedoed by a British submarine, not merely the loss of 1,000 tons of fuel, but the deliberate, surgical severing of the Axis logistical tail. Each tanker that slipped beneath the waves carried with it the fuel necessary to sustain dozens of Panzer IVs for weeks, and with each loss, the shadow on Richter's fuel gauge deepened. The hook lay in a seemingly trivial detail, the simple, ubiquitous 5-gallon fuel container. The Allies had perfected and mass-produced the standardized Jerrycan, a robust, easily stackable container. This mundane object became a matter of life and death, enabling the Allies to push their forward supply depots to within a few hours of the front line, contrasting sharply with the fragmented, often mismatched fuel drums the Germans relied upon. A deep dive into the numbers revealed the crushing technical disadvantage. The high-performance Panzer IV had an appalling fuel consumption rate, often achieving a mere 1 to 1.5 miles per gallon off-road. Its operational range was frighteningly limited, forcing entire panzer regiments to pause and wait, sometimes for days, for fuel convoys that may or may not arrive. Juxtapose this with the more economical American medium trucks, which achieved a far more efficient 6 to 8 miles per gallon. The sight of full American fuel tanks in every depot, stacked in pyramids of several thousand standardized cans, stood in sickening contrast to Richter's situation, where every drop of gasoline was a precious, agonizingly rationed commodity. The thesis of logistical capacity was broken down into its most fundamental element, the ability to move and sustain. Speed and firepower were rendered meaningless without fuel. A Panzer IV F2 could penetrate a Sherman at 2,000 meters, but if it had consumed its last drop of fuel getting into position, it was instantly transformed into an immobile steel tomb. The final devastating statistical reveal showed the true strategic oil slick that drowned the Axis ambition. While the Germans struggled to produce a trickle of fuel from their synthetic fuel plants, the total daily output of Axis synthetic fuel was dwarfed by the volume of 100-octane aviation fuel flowing from the massive refineries of the Americas and the Persian Gulf. American oil production alone exceeded 32 billion barrels annually, an abundance so vast that the Allies could afford to be wasteful. The Panzer IV was a technological miracle, doomed by the fact that its high-performance engine demanded a resource the Allies possessed in unchallengeable, cosmic abundance. The escalating tempo of the desert conflict was marked by the ever-increasing ferocity of the tank engagements, but the true climax at the midpoint that definitively shattered the logistical spine of the Afrikakorps occurred not on the sand, but from the searing blue void above. October 1942 was the month the quantitative edge of the Allied arsenal of democracy translated into a devastating qualitative military advantage. The sky was suddenly and overwhelmingly dominated by the sound of American-built P-40 Kitty Hawks and P-38s, delivering a relentless, indiscriminate avalanche of steel and lead upon anything that moved behind the German lines. Oberleutnant Richter now experienced the air war as a terrifying, visceral reality. The roar was an immediate, concussive thunderclap that preceded the deadly whistle of cannon shells. The hook lay in the mocking German nickname his ground crews had given the early American fighters, the flying milk bottle. That derision evaporated when Richter witnessed a squadron of these aircraft descend from the sun, not in a dogfight, but in a shallow, terrifying dive toward a column of his precious fuel and ammunition trucks. The milk bottles were now hammers from heaven, platforms of unmatched stability, delivering an apocalyptic rain of fire. The technical deep dive into this sudden air supremacy revealed the simple, unassailable power of American capacity. The primary weapon was the 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. An entire squadron of 12 aircraft could, in a 30-second pass, deliver 3,400 rounds of heavy, armor-piercing ammunition, tearing apart unprotected trucks and turning specialized repair facilities into burning debris. The Allied advantage was not merely in the guns, but in the unlimited supply of ammunition. The tactical shift was to systematically pulverize the German supply line, turning the entire area between the front and the sea into a kill zone. This air assault led to a psychological collapse of the German rearguard. The drivers and mechanics, crucial to keeping the fragile Panzer IV F2 running, were forced to operate under constant, paralyzing threat. The statistical reveal of the aerial operation in the days leading up to El Alamein served as the mathematics of defeat codified. The Allied air forces flew literally thousands of sorties in the week preceding the ground battle, with the overwhelming majority dedicated to interdiction, directly targeting fuel and spare parts convoys. This volume was a number so immense it was entirely beyond the German capacity to either defend against or counteract. This human-scale event was the undeniable proof of the core thesis. The quantitative edge in production translated directly into an insurmountable qualitative military advantage. The Panzer IV F2, the technological marvel, was now a static target awaiting its sentence, its fate sealed by the hammers from heaven forged on the vast anonymous assembly lines of the American industrial heartland. The technical arrogance that birthed the Panzerkampfwagen IV F2, the unwavering belief that superior design could overcome sheer numbers, contained the precise elements of its own inevitable undoing. The very precision that made the German machine so deadly became an existential weakness, leading to an irony that would consume the Wehrmacht. The hook lay in the slow-burn, deep-dive data exposition visible to the meticulous eye of a quality control inspector in Magdeburg. Observe the turret ring of a new Panzer IV, a vital, complex piece of machinery exhibiting the subtle flaws of forced mass production. These were imperfections born of necessity, a sign that the very materials and standards were beginning to fail under the impossible demands of the war economy. A technical deep dive into the metallurgical requirements revealed the terrifying depth of the German crisis. Superior armor required vital non-native elements like nickel and molybdenum for hardening and elasticity. These crucial finite resources were rapidly becoming unavailable due to the Allied blockade. As a consequence, German armor plate was subtly yet progressively altered, utilizing inferior substitute materials, making the later versions of the Panzer IV progressively more brittle and prone to catastrophic failure. This struggle highlights the defining contrast of the war economy. The Allies, swimming in an ocean of raw resources, had the ability to waste material in pursuit of simple, durable designs. The M4 Sherman was deliberately over-engineered with thick, generous slabs of readily available steel. The Germans, conversely, were forced into an extreme parsimony in complex, precise designs. Every part of the Panzer IV had to be perfectly engineered to be light, strong, and highly efficient, because every gram of steel was a finite resource. The necessity for perfection made the entire system catastrophically fragile. The moment the supply of nickel was cut, the foundation of the tank's defense was compromised. The despairing few in the high councils of the German Armaments Ministry understood this unwinnable equation. A senior German engineer might have lamented, We cannot make 1,000 perfect tanks when they are making 5,000 good ones. This was the inescapable reality. The technical quality of the Panzer IV F2 was a finite resource, one that the boundless industrial capacity of the Allies could simply overwhelm through the sheer volume of adequate material. The German tank was designed to win the duel, but the American industrial base was designed to win the war, proving that an unending torrent of sufficiency ultimately rendered the pursuit of costly, resource-intensive perfection utterly irrelevant. The final crushing realization for Oberleutnant Richter came not with the whiz of a superior shell, but with the sudden overwhelming vision of a new and horrifying arithmetic. His technical superiority had not prepared him for the avalanche of steel and lead that began to roll across the desert. The acceleration was dramatic during the first major tank-on-tank engagement, where the M4 Sherman appeared en masse, not as a scouting element, but as the vanguard of an irresistible tide. The hook was immediate and visceral. His shock was not rooted in the Sherman's power, but in its sheer abundance. The enemy tanks were a seeming endless wave, a density of armor the German operational mindset considered logistically impossible. He counted 17 of the medium tanks in his immediate field of view, an image that signified not a skirmish, but the undeniable, horrifying manifestation of the enemy's unchallengeable industrial capacity. The technical deep dive revealed the Sherman's battlefield characteristics were entirely inferior to the Panzer IV F2. Its 75mm M3 gun struggled to consistently penetrate the frontal armor of the Panzer IV. But the analysis failed to account for two crucial non-ballistic factors. The Sherman featured a vertical stabilizer on its gun, allowing surprising accuracy while moving, and the American crews possessed a seemingly unlimited supply of fuel, spare parts, and ammunition, the very resources that crippled the German fighting spirit. The juxtaposition of scales was the central tragedy of the German effort. Richter's Panzer IV performed brilliantly, dispatching 3 Shermans in less than 2 minutes. But the victory was instantly rendered meaningless. For every German kill, 3 more Shermans took the place of the destroyed vehicles, and behind those 3, another 17 were moving up to form a fresh wave. This was no longer warfare. It was a mathematics of destruction, where the superior machine was simply drowned by the volume of the adequate one. The individual technical supremacy of the Panzer IV could win the duel, but the sheer, unforgiving industrial output of the Allies had already won the war. The ultimate, unassailable statistical reveal was not a kill ratio, but a shipment manifesto. The total number of M4 Shermans shipped to the African theater by the end of 1942, a figure cresting 2,500 vehicles, signified not merely a battle, but a total economic declaration of war. This volume, delivered by the unending procession of Liberty ships, represented a debt that the German economy could never repay. The Panzer IV F2 confirmed the thesis through loss. It was a brilliant machine defeated not by a better design, but by a superior system of production. The defeat of the Afrikakorps was a slow, agonizing logistical strangulation, a brutal, grinding retreat that turned the desert into a colossal graveyard of irreplaceable materiel. The narrative shifted to the cold, hard logistics of abandonment and waste. The pacing of the retreat was rhythmic, periods of frantic movement alternating with agonizing halts. The hook of this grim chapter was the visceral experience of an anonymous German soldier forced to scuttle a perfectly good Panzerkampfwagen IV F2 because it had simply run out of fuel 100 kilometers from safety. The act of destruction, preparing the engine block for terminal detonation, was the ultimate betrayal of the German ethos, a deliberate, agonizing waste of specialized labor and finite resources. This moment initiated a technical deep dive into the chilling practice of scuttling. When that charge blew, it was incinerating the thousands of hours of skilled, specialized German labor invested in its creation, the complex precision machine transmission, the optical perfection of the gun sight. Each part, now deliberately destroyed, represented an irreplaceable component. The scale of this logistical self-immolation was horrifying. Richter, making his own agonized decision to blow his own tank after 3 days immobile and out of fuel, understood that his single heartbreaking action was mirrored across hundreds of kilometers. This moment of individual tragedy stood in sharp juxtaposition of scales against the vast impersonal industrial power of the Allies. Richter's small smoking pyre was the final effect of the millions of gallons of fuel destroyed by the Allies in preceding months. The Allied strategy was simple: ensure the German logistical chain was broken, and the German soldiers would destroy their own best equipment for them. The final physical proof of the thesis was undeniable. The Panzer IV F2 was not defeated by being shot. It was defeated by the absolute failure of logistics and supply, a failure caused by the overwhelming, unchallengeable capacity of the Allied industrial system. The statistical reveal that closed the curtain was the grim accounting of this failure: the total tonnage of irreplaceable equipment abandoned by the Axis in North Africa. Hundreds of tanks were left behind, a debt of material and labor that the German economy could never hope to repay. The value of this abandoned hardware confirmed the industrial triumph. The desert's revenge was complete, proving that the system based on volume and abundance would prevail, regardless of the relative excellence of a single weapon. The final brutal reckoning for the German High Command occurred not on the sun-baked soil of Tunisia, but where the logistics charts were mounted. The loss of the Afrikakorps revealed a strategic catastrophe: the unwinnable equation where the superior machine was consumed by the superior system of volume. The Panzer IV F2 had failed, not because its L-43 cannon was inadequate, but because the 20,000-mile logistical tail that sustained it had snapped. The hook was the chilling recognition of this industrial disparity, often articulated by the despairing few. We are providing meat for the slaughter. This led directly to the German war machine's desperate, reactionary turn to hyperspecialization, the birth of the Tiger, the Farman, and the Panther. These colossal machines were the direct, over-engineered descendants of the Panzer IV's encounter with the M4 Sherman. A technical deep dive into the specifications of the Tiger shows the magnitude of this overreaction. Where the Panzer IV F2 weighed 23 tons, the Tiger the Y swelled to a crushing 57 tons, designed to kill the Sherman at ranges previously considered theoretical. The irony was that the German solution to being outproduced was to build tanks so complex they could never be mass-produced, further sealing their fate. The reliance on highly specialized parts and scarce alloys meant that the production rate of these new Wunderwaffen was cripplingly low. The complexity led to constant mechanical breakdowns, meaning a disproportionate number of these irreplaceable titans were lost to maintenance failures, not combat. The German system had chosen the path of technological self-sabotage, doubling down on the very principle, precision over abundance, that had doomed the Panzer IV. The final catastrophic statistical reveal stands as the ultimate, unforgiving proof of the thesis. Over the entire course of World War II, Germany was able to produce approximately 1,350 Tigerdorn tanks and 6,000 Panthers. This total combined output was set against the sheer, overwhelming, unscalable torrent of Allied production. The United States produced over 50,000 M4 Shermans, and the Soviet Union produced over 55,000 T-34 tanks. The combined Allied output of over 105,000 adequate machines completely dwarfed the Axis effort. This catastrophic, unscalable difference was the conclusive proof of the thesis. The only response to overwhelming industrial capacity was a move toward technological self-sabotage, confirming that the initial premise of the Panzer IV's technical superiority had been a strategic dead end all along. The brilliance of a single design was powerless against the avalanche of anonymous steel. The final silence of the Western Desert is a somber, rhetorical conclusion to the narrative of German technological genius. Decades after the last shot was fired, the enduring reality of the conflict remains etched into the landscape. Our lingering gaze settles upon the hook, the rusting hulk of a Panzerkampfwagen IV Ausführung F2, half buried in the relentless encroaching silica dust. Its magnificent L-43 cannon points uselessly toward the empty, unforgiving sky, a metallic monument to a fundamental strategic miscalculation. The narrative of war often elevates the visible, the heroic, almost mythological status of Oberleutnant Richter and his fellow Panzer aces. But their genius and their meticulously engineered machines were utterly irrelevant to the forces that ultimately decided the war. Juxtapose this fleeting glory against the anonymous, tireless workers of the Allied factories, the true victors whose relentless output was the only mathematics that mattered. The enduring power of industrial capacity over individual genius is the essential, undeniable truth. The German tank was defeated by the simple fact that for every one built, the Allies could deploy 5, and for every 10 gallons of fuel the Germans struggled to deliver, the Allies could spare 180 million barrels of oil. The conclusion is devastatingly simple. The war was not won by an army or an ideology, but by the relentless, overwhelming power of that 20,000-mile logistical tail. It was the crushing power of standardization over specialization, abundance over parsimony, and the unwinnable equation of volume over quality. The data-supported conclusion is a single, devastating number that definitively ends the narrative of German technological supremacy. The Axis lost nearly 3 tanks for every one of the Allies, and that calculation fails to account for the crippling 70% mechanical attrition that consumed the German fighting strength. This is the sheer unfeeling mathematics of destruction. The Panzer IV F2, a technological miracle, taught the world that in the age of industrialized warfare, no amount of genius can defeat an unending supply of the mundane. The enduring dust covers the wreckage of a tank that was simply too good, too complex, and too thirsty to survive a war won on the strength of a 5-gallon jerrycan and the unchallengeable roar of the assembly line.